Good morning. Happy Mother's Day, Mum, and all the other mums out there. I don't know how many of you have locked yourselves in your houses, but if you've been outside, I don't know if you've noticed the flies. Well, they're in my house as well, and they are terrible. They are numerous, they are sticky, they are dumb. They tend to fly in front of your face, and usually you swipe them away and they'll buzz off and then they'll come back. But these times, it's almost like your hand just passes straight through them. They're just constant, and they're annoying. And you're driving in the car, and you think you've got your car empty of flies, and you'll find flies in there. And you'll wind the window down, and you'll drive, and you'll try and shoo them out the window, and people think you're waving at them, those who are actually out on the roads. And you think you've got them out the window, they disappear, so you wind the window up, and as soon as you wind the window up, they come back fast again. They've just zipped around behind you. They are so annoying. And I know they're part of God's creation. I know He's got a purpose for them. He put them there for a reason, but I just wish they'd do their reasoning somewhere else. Well, that's our story here this morning. Okay, that's where our story begins. We have Paul and Silas, and they have heard a voice, had a vision, or Paul's had a vision saying, go to Macedonia. And so they have head off to Macedonia, and they are now in Philippi. Now, if you want some geography, been in Turkey and around the Mediterranean. We're now in Greece. Okay, so we've ventured into Europe. And Paul and Silas, when they first went into Philippi, decided they would go to the usual place of prayer in a Roman colony like this, which seems to be the river. So they've wandered down to the river, and they've met this lady called Lydia, a well-to-do lady who deals in purple cloth. She's the head of her household, seems fairly well off, and they've had a good conversation with her. She's a God-believing woman, and she has come to know Jesus, and then offered for Paul and Silas to come into their household. Great. Was that the voice that was calling out that vision that Paul had to come to Macedonia? We need your help. Well, anyway, our story picks up in verse 16, when again Paul and Silas, and now there's a couple of extras in the scene. There's possibly Luke, the author of Acts, and Timothy, and they're all heading off probably down to the river to pray and to meet with people. And they're met by another woman, this time totally the other end of the schedule, not the well-to-do Lydia dealing in purple cloth and head of a household. We have a slave girl, but a girl who's not just a slave, but who is possessed by a spirit. So her spirit is not free, her body is not free, total other end of the spectrum. And the spirit in the girl is crying out, but crying out truths. It's crying out the truth that these men are servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved. What an introduction. Well, that's us. That's Paul and Silas. That's what we're doing. We're here to tell you the truth. We're here to tell you the way to be saved. That's great. Coming from this girl, but that's great. I can put up with that. A little fly just in my face. Just get it out a little bit. But it goes on to say that this woman just persists and persists and persists. And Paul's starting to get a bit jack of this and shooing the flies away until eventually a couple of days later, Paul just says, spirit that is in her, get out. I've had enough of this. Yes, you're telling the truth, but it's obnoxious. It's just in my face. It's just giving me a hard time. I'm having trouble concentrating. I want you gone. And like the old adage, when you kill a fly, 100 flies come to the funeral. That's pretty well exactly what's happened here. He's actually set the girl free. No longer is she possessed by the spirit, and I'm guessing to some degree being a slave girl, and her whole usage was the fact that she could tell the future, may have been set free from her owners as well. But it just causes trouble. You just see the story escalate now. And the owners of the slave girl, they get cranky. This is our life, this is our work, this is all we do. We don't have to work because we've got this girl making money for us, and you've just taken all that away from us. And so they grab Paul and they grab Silas, the ringleaders of this quad of fellas, or probably more, and drag them into the town centre and drag them in front of the magistrate. And they can't just go to the magistrate, these guys have just set this girl free from a spirit and that's affected our income, so we've got to do something about it. No, that's not going to work. Tell you what, these guys are causing a problem. They're Jews, and they're trying to push on us, the Romans, new traditions, new ways of life, and they're causing trouble in the city. And I've heard this story before. You recall what happened with Jesus? Jesus is dragged away and lies told about him, and the crowd stirs up. And in the same way here, the crowd stirs up, and the magistrates, rather than going, well, what's the truth and what's not the truth? We can't have this uproaring. Flog them. And so they take Paul and Silas and they get some rods and they flog them, and they flog them bad. And then after flogging them, they lock them up in jail. And they say to the jailer, make sure these guys don't get out. And so it's exactly what the jailer does. He's a good Roman soldier. He listens to his bosses. He takes Paul and Silas. He locks them up in prison. He puts their feet in stocks. He puts them in the inmost part of the jail, and then walks away. Sometimes that's us. Sometimes we feel like we've been falsely accused. Sometimes we feel like things are just unfairly wrong. Sometimes we feel like, I have rights. Why don't you respect them? But what is the response of Paul and Silas? Paul and Silas are locked up in jail, falsely accused, in stocks, beaten red raw on the back. And it says in verse 25, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners was listening to them. How amazing is that? What sort of testimony is that? Now, to understand this, I think we need to flip over to Philippians. If you record, we are in Philippi. This is the church, the beginning of the church, the Philippian church. And in Philippians, Paul is writing a letter to encourage that church later on. And in chapter 2 of Philippians, verse 1, it says, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and one in mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. And then the very well-known part that continues on that says, may your attitude be the same as that of Jesus Christ. Because wasn't that Jesus' attitude? That song we just sung, that Jesus left his home above in its perfect richness to come to earth voluntarily to pay the price for our rebellion against him. He counted himself as nothing, as Philippians chapter 2 continues on, taking on the very nature of a servant and being made in human likeness and going to death, being obedient to death, even death on a cross. That's what Paul's getting at. That's the story of Paul and Silas. That's why they're locked up in this prison, and rather than sitting in prison going, hey, let us out, we've been falsely accused, this is not fair, they are sitting there giving praises to God. They are singing hymns to God. They are praying out loud to God. And what's it say, the second part of that verse 25? And the other prisoners were listening to them. I don't know how many of you know the story of Corrie ten Boom. The ten Booms lived in Norway and Holland, the Dutch. Yes. And while they're living in Holland, war broke out. The Nazis were doing what they do to the Jews, and the ten Booms set up safe houses. In fact, in Corrie ten Boom's own house, she had rooms built in order to hide Jews. They were defending the Jews until one point where Corrie ten Boom and her sister were arrested. In fact, the whole family was arrested at some stage. And Betsy and Corrie ten Boom were put in concentration camps. And at one stage, when the Nazis seemed to be losing ground, they moved the entire of the women's concentration camp to Germany, to the Ravensbrück concentration camp, one of the worst concentration camps out there, where in the concentration camp, they were just stacked up. In their beds were 3 high, laden with dirty straw, and thousands of women in these concentration camps. In fact, so bad that the fleas and the lice were just living in this straw constantly. And Corrie ten Boom struggled with the fact that how can I praise God, or how is this good in any way that we're stuck in this concentration camp with these fleas and these lice? I just don't understand. But her sister Betsy was continuing to spread the message of Jesus to the people in their concentration camp. And Corrie's going, that's great, but this is unbearable. Except at one stage, some of the Nazis had come in, they'd been ordered to come in to find out what this Betsy was doing in this concentration camp, to find out what little project she was working on. But the supervisors of the Nazis wouldn't enter the dorms. They said, there is no way I'm going into those dorms because the fleas and the lice are in those dorms. I'm not entering. I'm not going in there. No way. And no one would go in to check up on what was going on inside the concentration camp. And that's when Betsy said to her sister, Corrie ten Boom, do you see that even in the worst of conditions, even with these fleas and these lice, you can be thankful in all things, because it's the fleas and the lice that are allowing us to go on with our project of sharing Jesus with these other women. And that's when it clicked for Corrie ten Boom, that she can be thankful in all situations. And here we have Paul and Silas locked up in jail, smacked over the back with these rods, bleeding, in stocks so they can't get comfortable, locked up in the inner sanctuary of the jail, singing praises to their God. Because as that song we just sung talks about, that long my imprisoned spirit lay. And it's not about me coming out of the chains, the physical chains or the stocks that bind my feet, or us getting out of the situations we find ourselves in, us being dealt with unfairly and thinking, I must find justice. It's about the fact that we can be free in Jesus because of what he has done for us. I titled my service this morning, we are free. As Christians, we are free to give up our freedom for the freedom of the so-called free. And isn't that the story here? That these slave drivers, that the magistrates, that the jailers all thought they were free to do what they wanted to do. Paul and Silas are actually getting their freedom taken away from them. And yet, Paul and Silas being in prison enabled their next part of the story to happen, which was to bring freedom to those who thought they were free but weren't actually free. Verse 26, suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prisons were shaken. At once all the prison doors flew open and everybody's chains came loose. That's some magnificent earthquake. Usually it brings down buildings and roofs and all the rest of it. But this is an earthquake that releases the chains of the prisoners, that it opens all the doors of the prison. Now, if we go back to chapter 12 of Acts, we see Peter was in jail at one stage. And while Peter was in jail, an angel of the Lord came into the jail and released his chains and then walked him out of the prison. And you think here as the story goes on that as Paul and Silas are in prison, the prison doors are open, God is enabling their escape. And you would expect them to then get up and walk out of the jail. But you see, Paul and Silas aren't being led by an angel. They haven't an angel there saying, get up, leave. In fact, they're more concerned with the jailer. Because as soon as the earthquake occurs, the jailer wakes up. And as the jailer wakes up, he takes a sword to himself and is about to impale himself because he realizes that all the jail doors are open. He realizes that I haven't done my job. And under Roman rule, if you go back to Peter's story in chapter 12, what does Caesar do when he finds out that Peter has escaped? He executes all the jailers. But in this story here, the jailer is about to do the same thing. He's going to take his own life rather than going in front of Caesar and getting his own throat cut. He's going to do it for himself. But Paul and Silas and all the other prisoners are still in the prison. They have decided that our freedom, we are willing to give that up for the freedom of this guy. I don't know how they convinced the other guys in the jail, but they did. Paul calls out and says, don't do it. Don't take your own life because we're all here. We haven't gone anywhere. And the jailer is just bemused. The jailer is just like, what? He calls for lights, rushes in, falls at Paul and Silas's feet. And in the words of that slave girl that sounded the streets before, these men are servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved. He says, how? How then can I be saved? Now, a lot of people are saying, does that mean he's asking, how can I be saved from Caesar killing me or being executed? But they're already in the jail. Nothing's gone wrong. I don't see that as the point. The point is that he wants to know what these guys have. What is the peace that these guys have that I don't as a jailer? So as a jailer, I live in fear. I live under the rule of the Romans. I'm told to do what I'm supposed to do. I do what I'm supposed to do. If I don't do what I'm supposed to do, I'm going to be executed. I might be a free man, but I'm really not free at all. But here are two guys locked up in prison and caned with sticks who are showing freedom that I know nothing about. And then Paul says those words, believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved. Believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved. Not just you, but your whole household. Does it mean that if the jailer believes in Jesus and the whole household automatically believes in Jesus? No. It's a bit of a customary thing where back in these days the head of the household was the head of the household. That the people in the household actually respected the head of the household. And what the head of the household believed, they were likely to believe as well. But they still had to make a decision for themselves. And then all of a sudden we see the jailer going from tremendous fear to being filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole family. See, Jesus is about freedom. Jesus is not just about freedom in the good times, but about freedom in the bad times. Jesus was so willing to grant you freedom and me freedom that he would give up his own freedom, his own home in heaven above, that he would come to earth and confine himself to a human body in order that you and I might know what and have a taste of what freedom is truly about. What a knowledge of God is truly about. And then he would go a step further in that he would allow himself to be crucified, that you and I might know that he was willing to do anything to show you love, anything to give you hope, anything to bring you freedom. Philippians chapter 4 verse 4 says, rejoice in the Lord always, and I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all, the Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God which transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and mind in Jesus. See, in following Jesus, you take on that hope. Jesus has been the ultimate example to us. That it doesn't matter what your circumstance. It doesn't matter what your situation. It doesn't matter how bound you feel by the things of this world. He wants to grant you freedom from that. He wants to grant you freedom from anxiousness. He wants to grant you freedom from fear. You don't have to claim your rights as a human being. You don't have to know justice from the outside of the church, from the bodies that govern you. You just need to know that God is in control. That God has you in his hands. He's going to take you where he wants to take you. And things might always not seem like they're going the way they're supposed to be going. But he has you. If you walk in the Spirit, if you follow his word, if you listen to his voice, if you allow him to live through you, as Paul and Silas did, then there is nothing that this world can do to you that can take your freedom away. You don't have to claim your rights. You don't have to know that people are treating you fairly. but you will have peace, a peace that transcends all understanding. And then in verse 35, when it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jail in order to release the men. And the jail is happy to say to Paul and Silas, look, go in peace. You've been set free. And yet Paul stops and says, no. No. You might be thinking you're granting me my freedom, but my freedom I already have. See, my freedom is here in Jesus, not in what my circumstances around me give. So then why does Paul stand up for his rights right now? Why does he say, hey, we're Roman citizens? You know, back in those days, you couldn't just do these things to Roman citizens. You couldn't judge them unfairly. You couldn't send them to jail without a hearing. You couldn't flog them without a higher authority. In fact, for Romans to be dealt with like they are here, whoever dealt out that punishment is actually worthy of death. And so you see the magistrates now drawn into panic mode. What? Roman citizens? Why didn't you bring this up before? Come out of the prison. Be nice, Now just go away gently and we won't cause you any more trouble. Why did Paul mention this now? Why didn't he mention it before? Why, when he was dealt with unfairly, didn't he say, hey, hang on, guys. You can't flog us. We're Roman citizens. Because what would he be protecting there? If he was to claim Roman citizenship way back then when he was being dealt with unfairly, for whose benefit would that be? It would have been for his own. But here, in verse 38, the officers reported this to the magistrates, and when they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, they were alarmed, and they came to appease. And for all of a sudden, the magistrates now owe Paul and Silas. What have Paul and Silas been doing in Philippi? Paul and Silas have been building a church. From the start with Lydia and her family, and now the jailer and his family, they've been building a church. And Paul didn't want to leave the church in fear. He didn't want them to think that the magistrates can do whatever they like and get away with it, and therefore the church be succumbed to the fear of the Romans. He was releasing the church. He was allowing the church freedom from Roman rule in some respects, from Roman oppression. He was giving them the freedom to breathe, really. And it says that Paul, after coming out of the prison and being ordered to leave the city, they didn't just straight away leave the city. What did they do first? They went and visited Lydia's house. They went and encouraged Lydia. Did they not listen to the Romans and not leave the city? No, they still left the city. They still listened to the government authorities. But they're not bound by the government authorities. You and I have been bound by all this COVID-19 stuff. And you might think it rubbish, you might think it good, you might think that the government sort of knows what they're doing, but sometimes they just go a little bit too far. Can I tell you that the government is doing what they know best? They've never been in this situation before. This is new territory for everybody. And sometimes we can jump the gun. As Australians, we like to push the limits. We like to push the law a little bit. What can I get away with? Paul and Silas didn't take on that attitude. Their attitude wasn't, what can I get away with? Their attitude was, I'm free. The law doesn't actually restrict me. I will use the law for my to display my freedom, to show you my dedication to my God. So as we come into a time of less restrictions in Australia, the idea of most people is, it's great. And straight away, you go to Big W and the car park's full. All of a sudden, everyone's got a little bit of freedom and they go to the nth degree. Is that going to help anybody? No, it's probably not. The law is there for a reason. But I want to tell you, you are not bound by the law, but in trying to push the law actually restricts you. Do you understand that? That in you trying to push the law to its furthest limits is showing that you're actually bound by the law. So in the same way, in following Jesus, to push the limits, you're actually showing that you're still living by the law. The freedom comes when you are free inside. The freedom comes when you realize that in the same way as Jesus Christ, who laid down his life for his people, that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to lay down my freedom for the people. I'm going to allow myself to be dealt with falsely. I'm going to allow myself to be imprisoned, if so to say. That the jailer, the guy who is one inflicting all this punishment on me, might know Jesus and be saved. I don't know what situation you find yourself in at the moment. Most of us, to some degree, are locked in houses. To some of us, are locked in relationships. We talked about this before. You might be stuck in a job. You might be having false accusations put against you. You do have rights. In Australia, we have rights. The law tells us what our rights are. But I want to ask you, what are you willing to give up for the sake of others? God will not allow you to go through any circumstance beyond what you can handle. He will allow you to go places where you may not feel comfortable in order that others might hear the story of Jesus. Whatever inflicts you at this point in time, I pray that you might be able to hand it over to him. I pray that you might be able to let go of those bits that you want to hang on to that say, no, this is unfair. I am not being treated right. I am not being dealt with fairly. I want you to let go of the eyes and start looking at the possibilities. That if God allows me to go through this situation, what can be done for his kingdom? If I allow myself to not deal with the eyes anymore, maybe I'll start looking at other people's eyes. Maybe I'll start to think, well, actually, God has a great purpose here. I am willing to do whatever he wants me to do. Are you willing to let go? The world owes you nothing. Jesus owes you nothing. Jesus has done everything for you by giving himself away completely. Are you willing to give yourself away completely? Are you willing to let go of everything you feel the world owes you in order that you might do for Jesus what Jesus has done for you? And this is my prayer from Philippians chapter 1, verse 9 to 11. That your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. Amen.